They laughed at her request. Specialist Elena Rodriguez raised her hand, her voice calm but firm. "Sir, I'll need an M249 for this op." For a moment, silence. Then a ripple of chuckles, starting in the back and spreading forward. Someone snorted. "Rodriguez, what are you planning, a Rambo audition?" The laughter grew bolder, louder. Even the lieutenant cracked a grin, shaking his head. Heavy weapons weren't her role. She was a combat engineer, the one who cleared mines, set charges, fixed bridges, patched roads. Practical, essential, but never the one laying down sweeping fields of fire. Not the soldier carrying the kind of gun designed to pin down whole squads of enemies. The major, standing over a dusty map spread across a crate, lifted his eyes at her. His look wasn't unkind, but it carried the weight of dismissal. "Specialist," he said, voice low and clipped, "you'll carry what's in your standard kit. We don't assign squad automatics to engineers because someone feels like it. You'll take what's issued." But Rodriguez didn't blink. Her dark eyes stayed locked on his. "With respect, sir, we'll need sustained suppressive fire when we hit the choke point. If you don't give me an M249, you'll regret it." That stopped a few of the chuckles. But only for a moment. A sergeant leaned back, shaking his head, muttering, "She thinks she's the hero of a movie." The major sighed, rubbing his forehead. "Dismissed." And just like that, the laughter returned. Not cruel, not yet. But sharp, dismissive, the kind of laughter that says we've already decided what you're worth. The soldiers filed out, boots crunching against the sand. Maps folded, radios checked, gear shouldered. The operation was moving forward. Operation Sunstrike, the mission was simple on paper, brutal in reality. A sweep through a series of narrow desert canyons, cutting off an enemy column before it reached Outpost Echo, where 200 American soldiers were dug in. If the enemy reached them, it would be a massacre. But paper maps never capture the desert. The desert doesn't care about plans. It burns, blinds, hides shapes in the heat haze. It swallows men whole when they underestimate it. Rodriguez tugged her helmet strap tight and followed her squad out to the Humvees. The sky outside the tent was a flawless, merciless blue. The horizon shimmered, the ground glowing gold under the sun. Engines were already roaring, convoys kicking up pillars of dust. The heat radiated off the armor like a furnace. She climbed into the last vehicle, jaw clenched. Her pack dug into her shoulders, heavier than usual. Because despite the laughter, despite the refusal, she had found a way. The supply sergeant hadn't listened. Neither had the major. But Rodriguez knew how to work the quiet corners of the base, knew who to ask and how to move fast before questions caught up. And so, hidden under a tarp in the back of her Humvee, wrapped in stubborn determination, was the very thing they'd mocked her for. An M249 light machine gun. Belt-fed. Reliable. Deadly. She rested her hand on the tarp without looking at it, feeling the weight beneath her palm. The desert wind whipped through the open side of the Humvee, carrying with it the smell of dust and heat. Her squad talked and joked, unaware, unconcerned. By late morning, the convoy was rolling. The canyon walls in the distance loomed like broken teeth, shadows etched deep in the sun. Radios crackled, trucks rattled, sweat stung eyes. And in the back of the last Humvee, Rodriguez sat in silence, the laughter of her comrades still echoing in her ears. 5 hours later, when everything collapsed into chaos, when the canyon swallowed sound, when the sky filled with smoke, when survival balanced on a knife's edge, that ridiculous request would become the only thing standing between life and annihilation. And 200 soldiers would live to remember the day the quiet engineer broke through the noise, the doubt, and the desert itself. The desert was quiet in that strange way only deserts know, a silence so heavy it pressed against the skin, broken only by the grumble of engines and the rasp of wind through stone. By noon, the convoy had reached the canyon mouth. From a distance it looked harmless, just a gap in the horizon, but as the vehicles rolled forward, the cliffs rose higher, closing in, narrowing the world to walls of sun-baked rock. Rodriguez felt her throat tighten. She had studied this place on maps, traced every contour with her eyes. And still, maps never told the truth. The real thing was worse. She could see it now: choke points, blind corners, ledges that would hide rifles. This was no ordinary pass. It was a funnel. A perfect place for an ambush. The Humvee jolted over a rut. Her squadmates bounced with it, laughing, shaking dust from their hair. To them it was another patrol, another hot drive and another nameless canyon. To her, it was a ticking clock. She glanced back at the tarp in the corner of the vehicle, where the M249 lay hidden. Her hand itched to pull it out now, but not yet. Not until the moment came. The radio crackled with clipped orders. Convoy, maintain speed. Stay tight. Keep spacing minimal. We'll clear the canyon in under an hour. An hour. Rodriguez knew it wouldn't last that long. The first shot came so suddenly it didn't sound real. A crack like drywood snapping, echoing between stone walls. Then another. And another. The convoy froze. A Humvee at the front lurched sideways, its tires shredded, smoke pouring from the hood. Shouts erupted. Soldiers scrambled for cover that didn't exist: no trees, no trenches, only rock and heat. Contact left. Contact right, someone screamed. The canyon exploded. Automatic fire rained down from the cliffs, tracers slicing the air. RPGs streaked like firebirds, slamming into armor with bone-shaking force. The noise was deafening: engines revving, weapons chattering, men yelling. Dust rose in choking clouds, blinding eyes, filling mouths. Rodriguez ducked instinctively as rounds smacked the Humvee's plating. She could hear the panic in her squadmates' voices. Engineers weren't trained for firefights like this. Their rifles were enough for self-defense, not for holding off a full-scale assault from elevated ground. The radio roared, "We're pinned. Multiple hostiles, both ridges. Suppression fire now." But the squad automatics were already down. One gunner had been hit, his weapon silent, the others jammed or out of position. The convoy was trapped in the canyon's throat, every vehicle boxed in, nowhere to turn. Rodriguez felt the old laughter echoing in her head. Rambo audition. Hero of the movie. Her jaw clenched. Not today. She yanked the tarp back, revealing the M249. Her squadmates' eyes widened, disbelief cutting through fear. "You, how the hell did you?" She didn't answer. Didn't need to. The weapon was already in her hands, the belt snaking into place. She swung out of the Humvee, boots hitting the dirt, sun blinding her for a moment. Bullets cracked past her helmet. She didn't flinch. She dropped prone beside the wheel well, pressed the stock to her shoulder, and squeezed the trigger. The M249 roared to life. A stream of fire poured upward, hammering the ridge where muzzle flashes spat down. The gun bucked, heat surging into her arms, brass casings clinking to the ground like falling coins. The canyon filled with a new sound, not just scattered rifles, but a steady, thundering curtain of suppressive fire. Her squad stared, stunned, as enemy shooters ducked back behind cover. For the first time since the ambush started, the incoming fire slowed. Just enough for the convoy to breathe. Just enough for the pinned soldiers to raise their heads, return fire, reorganize. Rodriguez's world shrank to the weapon, the belt, the rhythm of bursts. Her cheek pressed into the stock, her eyes tracking flashes in the cliffs. She didn't hear the shouted orders, didn't notice the dirt spraying around her. She was locked in. Focused. And as she fired, a thought cut through the chaos like steel: this is why I asked. This is why they laughed. This is why I came prepared. 5 minutes into the ambush, two truths had become clear. Without her, the canyon would already be a grave. With her, 200 soldiers still had a chance. The desert canyon had become a furnace of chaos. Bullets ricocheted off rock with the shriek of angry hornets. Dust clouds swirled so thick they painted the sun in a pale, cruel haze. Radios screamed half-broken messages, orders shouted over static, men calling for medics, voices cutting out mid-sentence. But one sound rose above it all. The staccato thunder of the M249. Rodriguez lay pressed against the dirt, elbows digging into the grit, the weapon steady against her shoulder. The light machine gun was alive in her hands, spitting fury at the ridges. Brass casings rained like golden hail, piling by her arms, their metallic clinks lost in the roar. Every burst pinned another cluster of muzzle flashes, every spray bought seconds of life for soldiers scrambling behind vehicles. A sergeant dove beside her, eyes wide with disbelief. You brought that damn thing?" Rodriguez didn't look at him. She fired another burst, shifted, and barked, "Cover left ridge, third ledge up. I'll suppress the rest." Her voice wasn't asking. It was commanding. Something strange happened in that moment. The sergeant, older, higher rank, hesitated only a heartbeat before obeying. Because in that chaos, authority wasn't about stripes or bars. Authority was about who was standing tall, or in this case, lying in the dirt, keeping 200 men alive with each squeeze of the trigger. The convoy was still boxed in, but the rhythm shifted. Soldiers who had been frozen by the storm of incoming fire began to move again. One team dragged a wounded man behind a wheel well. Another sprinted for the ridgeline with a radio, protected by the steady wall of suppressive fire. Officers shouted clearer orders now, no longer drowned by panic. "Second platoon, push right. Get the medics forward. Reload, keep the line." And through it all, Rodriguez kept firing. The weapon vibrated against her, the heat soaking into her gloves, the smell of cordite stinging her nose. She worked the bursts in disciplined arcs, never wasting a round. The canyon was wide, but her fire carved space for others to breathe, to fight back. She shifted her body slightly, sweat trickling down her spine, grit biting her skin. She could feel the sun cooking her helmet, see the mirage heat shivering above the rocks. And still, she fired. At one point, a bullet snapped so close it cut a groove in the dirt by her cheek. Another struck sparks off the Humvee wheel inches from her arm. But her hands didn't shake. She kept her cheek pressed to the stock, her eyes searching, her mind sharper than it had ever been. "Rodriguez," someone shouted. She half-turned, saw Corporal Harris waving desperately. "We're getting chewed up on the east side. Can you shift?" She didn't hesitate. She rolled, swung the barrel, and raked the eastern ridge with a punishing burst. Enemy fighters ducked, disappeared. Harris and his men surged forward, rifles blazing, taking the ground they thought lost minutes earlier. A strange calm threaded through the chaos. Rodriguez could feel it. The balance shifting. The laughter she had heard that morning felt like it belonged to another life. Out here, nobody was laughing. Out here, every soldier who saw her knew exactly what she was, the anchor. The difference. The belt ran dry with a hollow click. She ejected, hands moving fast, slapping in a fresh one from the pouch she had hidden under her vest. The motions were automatic, smooth. The weapon barked to life again before the canyon could swallow the gap. Minutes stretched like hours. The enemy pressed harder, sending volleys of fire, testing the line. RPGs streaked down, one slamming into a vehicle mid-column, flipping it in a plume of black smoke. The ground shook with the blast, men shouted, and for a heartbeat panic surged again. But then, Rodriguez fired. A punishing, unbroken stream of rounds that raked the ridges, forcing heads down, drowning out fear with sheer noise and fury. Her squad mates, the same ones who had laughed, now crawled closer, eyes lit with something new, not mockery, not even shock, but trust. One handed her spare ammo belts without being asked. Another called out targets, spotting for her between bursts. The engineer had become the machine gunner. The dismissed request had become the center of survival. And slowly, painfully, the convoy began to hold. The canyon was still a death trap, the enemy still had the high ground, but Rodriguez had done the impossible, she had stopped the bleeding. For the first time since the ambush began, survival wasn't just a desperate hope. It was a real possibility. The fight dragged into its second hour. What had begun as a sudden ambush had hardened into a siege. The canyon, narrow and unforgiving, pulsed with smoke, dust, and the ringing echoes of endless gunfire. The desert sun, now high and merciless, scorched everything it touched. Armor plating glowed too hot to rest a hand on, sweat streamed into eyes, and every breath tasted of grit and burning powder. Rodriguez's world had narrowed to the M249. The weapon thumped against her shoulder, again and again, each burst a heartbeat. The steel was so hot she could feel it even through her gloves. The barrel shimmered with heat haze. Every few minutes she eased off, swapped belts, adjusted her fire, but the truth was clear, the gun was working beyond its limits. She was too. Her body screamed with exhaustion, arms heavy, back aching, jaw clenched tight from hours of focus. But adrenaline kept her locked in place. She knew what would happen if she stopped, even for a moment. The enemy knew it too. After their first failed rush, the fighters had regrouped. Now they pressed harder, pouring fire down from the cliffs. More RPGs shrieked through the air, slamming into vehicles, throwing black smoke into the desert sky. The convoy was a mess of shattered metal and wounded men, but it wasn't broken, not yet. And the reason was Rodriguez. Her gun spat long arcs of suppressive fire whenever the enemy tried to surge forward. She picked out the glints of scopes, the sudden bursts of muzzle flash, and hammered them before they could zero in. Each time she fired, soldiers around her moved with more confidence, medics dragging men to cover, riflemen sprinting to new positions, officers shouting orders no longer drowned in panic. But the cost was mounting. Her ammo belts ran low. The pouches around her were lighter now, too light. She had begun taking belts from wounded soldiers, stripping what she could from the destroyed Humvee ahead. Every round mattered. Every burst had to count. Then it happened. The M249 jammed. The roar cut off mid-burst, leaving only the shriek of enemy fire in her ears. Rodriguez cursed, yanking the charging handle, fingers working fast. The belt had twisted, the feed jammed. She ripped it free, slammed it back, tried again. The gun refused. The ridge erupted. Enemy fire poured down in that instant, as if they had been waiting for her silence. Soldiers dove for cover, shouting in panic. A round clipped the ground so close it sprayed her face with stinging grit. Another smashed sparks off the Humvee above her head. Her squad mates shouted. "Rodriguez! We're exposed!" Her hands moved with desperate speed. Clear the feed. Check the chamber. Breathe. Don't panic. The sun burned her back, the gunmetal seared her gloves, her ears rang with incoming fire. For 3 endless seconds she was unarmed, and in those 3 seconds, death clawed at the convoy. Then, click, thump, roar. The gun came alive again, belching fire with a vengeance. Rodriguez swept the ridge in a punishing arc, the belt streaming through her hands. Enemy fighters who had begun to rise were slammed back into cover. The canyon filled once more with the thunder that had kept everyone alive. Her squad cheered hoarsely, voices ragged with relief. But Rodriguez didn't join them. She couldn't afford to. She felt the tremor in the weapon, the way the barrel glowed white-hot. The machine gun wouldn't last forever. Neither would she. And the enemy knew it. They were gathering for another push. She could see it in the shadows on the ridges, shapes moving, groups forming, preparing to flood the canyon floor. If they made it down, if they breached the line, the convoy would collapse. Rodriguez swallowed, wiped grit from her eyes, and checked her last 2 belts of ammo. Barely enough. She glanced at her squad, at the wounded line behind ruined vehicles, at the officers shouting into radios for support that might never come. 200 lives pressed against the canyon walls, balanced on the edge of her endurance and the gun's breaking point. The desert sun hung overhead, merciless and silent. The next wave was coming. And she would have to meet it head-on, even if her gun melted in her hands. The canyon felt smaller now, tighter, as if the cliffs themselves were closing in. Smoke curled upward in lazy black columns, smudging the sky into a pale, dirty gray. The air shimmered with heat, vibrating like a mirage, and every breath scraped her lungs with dust. The radio screamed with orders, but Rodriguez barely heard them. Her focus was on the ridges, on the shifting shapes above. The enemy was massing. She could see them, fighters moving along the rock face, dropping into shadowed ledges, taking positions for something bigger. Then the shouting stopped. For one strange heartbeat, silence fell. Even the gunfire lulled. It was the kind of silence that wasn't relief but warning, the breath before a scream, the stillness before a storm. And then the storm came. Dozens of enemy fighters surged from the ridges at once, pouring fire down like a waterfall of sparks. RPGs shrieked, slamming into the canyon floor. One vehicle burst into flames, the blast rocking Rodriguez so hard she bit her lip bloody. Shrapnel whined past her helmet. The assault had begun. This wasn't harassment anymore. It was an attempt to wipe them out. Rodriguez slammed a new belt into the M249. Her last full one. She didn't even think about it, her body moved on instinct, racking the charging handle, swinging the weapon into position. "Get ready," she roared, voice breaking. "They're coming down." Her squad snapped to it. Men who had once laughed at her were now huddled at her side, rifles raised, waiting for her rhythm. She squeezed the trigger. The M249 roared again, spitting fire into the ridgeline. The sound alone changed everything. The steady, punishing bursts echoed through the canyon, drowning out the enemy's advance. Dust kicked up from the rocks as her rounds chewed into the stone, forcing fighters to duck, stumble, scatter. For every man who tried to leap down the slope, she met him with a hail of bullets that sent him tumbling back. But they kept coming. Her barrel glowed white-hot. The weapon vibrated with fury, every round threatening to tear it apart. Sweat stung her eyes. Her arms ached, her chest burned, her jaw clenched so hard it hurt. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. The convoy tried to move. Engines revved, wheels spun against dirt. A Humvee lurched forward, swerving around wreckage, soldiers pushing to create a path. They needed her covering fire. Without it, they wouldn't make it 50 feet. "Rodriguez, hold them." "Just hold them," an officer screamed, voice breaking through the chaos. She answered with fire. Long, disciplined bursts, sweeping arcs that carved breathing room into the enemy line. Soldiers moved in her shadow, sprinting from cover to cover, dragging wounded, reloading weapons. Her last belt dwindled fast. She could feel it sliding through her hands, lighter and lighter. Casings clinked around her like metallic rain, piling at her elbows. She tried not to think about the moment it would end, but the thought clawed at the back of her mind. And then the gun stuttered. A dry click. Empty. For a fraction of a second, silence. The kind of silence that meant death. But Rodriguez didn't freeze. She rolled onto her side, tore the last half-belt from her pouch, and slammed it into place with hands that shook from exhaustion. The rounds slid into the feed. She pulled the handle back. The weapon roared again. Her squad cheered hoarsely, voices cracked from dust and fear. But she didn't hear them. Her ears rang, her world shrank to the sights, the flashes, the endless pull of the trigger. The enemy's wave faltered. They hadn't expected resistance this fierce, not from an engineer with a weapon she wasn't supposed to have. Their fire slackened, their push slowed. Men ducked, scrambled, retreated back into the ridges. But the canyon was still hell. Explosions rolled like thunder. Smoke burned her lungs. Her arms felt like stone, her vision blurred, her helmet slipped with sweat. She had nothing left to give, except one more burst, and then another, until there was nothing left at all. And yet she kept going. For 5 hours she had held this line. For 5 hours she had given every drop of strength, every ounce of defiance, every round of ammunition she could scavenge. 200 lives balanced on her will. And now, as the convoy roared forward through the breach, engines screaming, soldiers firing back with renewed fury, Rodriguez stayed at her post, prone in the dirt, belt-fed thunder hammering against the desert, holding the canyon open long enough for them all to survive. The gun was nearly dry. She knew it. But she would not stop until the last soldier was out. Not while she still breathed. The canyon was chaos. Engines roared, vehicles lurched forward, wounded men shouted as they were dragged onto trucks. The convoy was moving, slow, battered, but moving. And still the enemy pressed. Fighters swarmed the ridges for one last push, determined to break the column before it escaped. Rodriguez lay in the dirt, sweat stinging her eyes, the M249 blistering hot in her hands. The barrel glowed, the air shimmered around it. She had one last half-belt of rounds left. That was all. She knew the gun wouldn't survive another full burst. Maybe neither would she. But behind her were 200 soldiers, and ahead was freedom. She pressed her cheek to the stock, lined up on the ridge, and pulled the trigger. The gun roared like thunder splitting the desert. Flames spat from the barrel, brass poured down in a furious stream. The canyon echoed with her defiance. Enemy fighters staggered, dropped, scrambled back into cover. Her bursts carved seconds, precious, golden seconds, for the convoy to push through. The belt clinked empty. The gun clicked dry. Smoke curled from the barrel like the last breath of a dying beast. Rodriguez let it drop beside her, chest heaving, ears ringing in the silence that followed. And then, an explosion shook the ground. The last RPG slammed into the canyon wall, spraying rock and dust, but too late. The lead vehicles had broken free into the open desert. Radios crackled with victory shouts. "We're through! Keep moving!" Rodriguez rolled onto her back, staring up at the pitiless sun. Around her, soldiers were still firing, covering each other, but the tide had turned. The enemy fire was thinning, their momentum broken. The convoy was alive. Boots pounded toward her. A medic dropped beside her, shouting over the ringing in her ears. "Specialist, you all right?" She tried to answer, but only managed a tired grin. Her arms trembled, her body felt hollow, but she was still breathing. Men she barely knew, officers, grunts, even the same ones who had laughed that morning, were looking at her differently now. No jokes, no smirks. Just raw respect. Hours later, when the dust finally settled and the convoy regrouped in the open desert, word spread like wildfire. An engineer with an unnecessary M249 had held a canyon against impossible odds. 200 soldiers lived because she had refused to let go of the gun. Rodriguez sat on the bumper of a Humvee, helmet off, hair plastered to her forehead with sweat. She cradled a canteen in her shaking hands, staring at the horizon. The desert sun was setting now, bleeding gold and red across the sky. She remembered the laughter. The mockery. And she remembered the silence when her gun stopped, when death closed in, when only her will kept them alive. Nobody was laughing anymore. Somewhere down the line, a sergeant said it out loud, rough but honest. "She saved us all." And in the desert twilight, that truth settled heavier than any weapon.